Well, let's go live now to Moscow. Our correspondent Daniel Hawkins is standing by. Daniel, this is a fast-moving story today, but just tell us what we know right now.
Well, it certainly is a fast-moving story, but one that has, of course, been in the works for many, many weeks, if not months. We understand that American officials and Russian officials also confirmed that this agreement was actually reached as early as last Thursday, with Biden confirming that and signing pardon for Viktor Bout days later. This has been kept very well under wraps, and of course, this followed talks in Ankara between the heads of the Russian and American secret services, which possibly contributed to a breakthrough in these negotiations. The Russian Foreign Ministry has said that until the very end, the American side didn't show any willing to include Viktor Bout in this exchange, criticizing the American counterparts. And the Americans, of course, in turn criticized the Russians for not going into these negotiations in good faith. It seems, though, that something did cause that breakthrough. Now, both sides are likely to view this, of course, as a win, as a victory, because in the US, Griner's imprisonment was viewed as a miscarriage of justice, as a travesty, and essentially almost as a misunderstanding. And likewise, from the Russian side, though, Viktor Bout was convicted of extremely serious offences, nothing compared to the small amount of cannabis oil that Griner had in her possession at Moscow airport. That was also viewed by some Russian officials as a miscarriage of justice, and he always claimed his innocence. So in a way, both sides will be able here to go back respectively to the population, to the news teams, and say, look, we've got a victory here, we've got a result, and effectively justice has been served.
And Daniel, we're waiting for the US President Joe Biden to speak. He's expected to speak explicitly about this prisoner exchange. While we wait for him, just take us back to February of this year when Griner was arrested in Moscow. What happened then? And the timing is significant as well, isn't it? Because that was just, a couple of days, I believe, before the invasion of Ukraine began.
It was very significant, and of course, back in February, Griner was detained at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport for possession of cannabis oil cartridges. The drug laws in Russia are very strict. The jails are full of a lot of people that have used drugs. But of course, there are precedents of foreign citizens, American citizens, also being arrested in Russia for drugs offences and subsequently being released and simply deported. The sentence given to Griner was perhaps unusually harsh and was surprising to many. And that was because of, as you quite rightly say, the timing. Had Griner been detained weeks or months before, it's possible she would have got away with a slap on the wrist, a warning, a deportation. This sentence was viewed by many as a political sentence and turned Griner effectively into a bargaining chip. She spent a lot of time in Russian police custody in a sort of temporary holding cell where conditions are much better than in Russian prisons. The negotiations for her release began probably months after, or weeks rather, after her arrest. She was eventually sent to a Russian penal colony. That happened, I believe, just a few weeks ago. And that's when the negotiations really intensified. So Griner, unfortunately for her family, for loved ones, really became a victim of circumstance, a victim of breakdown in relations and diplomacy between Russia and the United States. And many in the US will be thankful that that has been overcome by this behind the scenes, very secretive diplomacy that we've seen over the last 2 weeks and months.
And just briefly, what of Viktor Bout himself? What can you tell us about him?
Well, these offences that these two citizens have been convicted of, they're really quite incomparable. As I said, Griner was convicted of formerly of smuggling. The amount of cannabis oil she had was very small, less than a gram, and she was sentenced to around 9 years, I believe, in prison. Viktor Bout was internationally wanted as an arms trafficker. He used his experience serving in the military. The allegation against him was that he smuggled arms to Africa, to the Middle East. He was wanted by Interpol, and eventually he was arrested, excuse me, in a sting operation by American agents in Thailand. He was then extradited. He faced numerous charges of arms smuggling, trafficking, putting American citizens' lives at risk, and eventually he was convicted in 2012 to 25 years minimum jail time, and he's been in jail, of course, since then. He's always denied these allegations, claimed his innocence, and Russian officials have also claimed that this has been a miscarriage of justice, a discrimination against him for being Russian, that the case was political. Many will state quite obviously these cases are incomparable in terms of their severity, incomparable in terms of their gravity. But the Russians were absolutely steadfast that they wanted Viktor Bout released in exchange for Griner. The American side, of course, were very reluctant given the difference in their sentences. But it seems that finally this one-for-one prisoner exchange was agreed. And as I say, both sides will be able to claim some sort of victory and some sort of moral victory as well when these two people get home to their respective countries.
Daniel Hawkins, live in Moscow. Thanks very much indeed. And we are